Thank you for joining the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research's Pilot and Cardiac Sarcoidosis Grant Writing webinar. The webinar will begin shortly. There will be silence, but please know that you are connected. Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research's webinar on FSR grant writing for the Pilot and Cardiac Sarcoidosis Grant. I am Tamara Al-Hakim, FSR's Research Project Manager. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. Your audio will be muted. However, we would like to encourage you to ask questions. You can use the chat feature to type your questions throughout the presentation. We will have a question and answer period at the end of this webinar. We all want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this exciting webinar. FSR launched this webinar series in January of 2021 as a way to provide additional support and guidance for researchers seeking funding in sarcoidosis. Earlier this year, we held a fellowship grant writing webinar with Dr. Lisa Meyer and Dr. Shuyi Lau from National Jewish Health to talk about the best ways to write a fellowship grant and the importance of an FSR fellowship grant. It highlighted how fellowship funding and FSR helps early career investigators. To view this webinar, please see the link provided in the chat. This webinar will be recorded and will go live on our website. I am now pleased to introduce Mary McGowan, FSR's CEO, to kick us off today.
Thank you, Tamara, and welcome everyone. We're thrilled to be joined today by those of you who share our passion for better treatments and a cure for sarcoidosis. FSR is the leading international nonprofit association committed to accelerating research in sarcoidosis, providing education and support to those living with sarcoidosis and their care partners, and raising awareness about sarcoidosis worldwide. So FSR was founded over 20 years ago, and since that time, FSR has provided over $5 million in support of sarcoidosis research. FSR is dedicated to providing education, support, and advocacy for patients living with sarcoidosis and the physicians who care for them. And FSR has a large community of over 60,000 members. Next slide, please. FSR has a four-pronged approach to what we do. First, we work to advance and accelerate research in sarcoidosis. FSR has a robust fellowship and grant program to support researchers in the sarcoidosis space. In addition, through FSR's SARC Connect program, FSR works with academic and industry partners to identify willing clinical trial participants and to ensure that all research remains patient-centered. FSR also provides those living with sarcoidosis numerous support opportunities, including wellness programming, social events with others who have similar lived experiences, and one-on-one support through our Patient Navigator program. Additionally, FSR is committed to providing educational opportunities for patients and clinicians in order to provide them the most up-to-date research and clinical care information in sarcoidosis. And finally, FSR advocates for researchers and clinicians and those living with sarcoidosis by encouraging more funding for sarcoidosis research and working to reduce access challenges. Next slide, please. So FSR maintains a very strong scientific advisory board composed of the world-renowned key opinion leaders within the field of sarcoidosis, medical research, therapy development, and medical practice. And we are honored to have them at the helm of the organization. Next slide, please. We are excited to have closed out a very successful Sarcoidosis Awareness Month. This month's theme, Make It Visible, resonated worldwide. Throughout this campaign, we shared clinician stories, as you can see here from Dr. Elliot Krauser, FSR Scientific Advisory Board Chair, as well as patient stories, both in the United States and internationally. Patients received proclamations from local governments to recognize April as Sarcoidosis Awareness Month. Additionally, 2 of our hospital partners organized that their buildings be lit up purple in their cities in honor of World Sarcoidosis Day and sarcoidosis awareness. We were thrilled to see the community's engagement with our community access awareness campaign and also our month t-shirt, which will help us to raise awareness year round. Next slide, please. So just a few weeks ago, FSR hosted a patient listening session to the FDA for pulmonary sarcoidosis. In this influential listening session, there were 6 patient speakers and 1 care partner. Dr. Lisa Meyer represented the FSR Scientific Advisory Board, providing analysis of the disease from the physician standpoint. There were 50 members from the FDA in attendance. Thank you to all who completed our survey. We used your responses in shaping the messages that we put forth to the FDA. I would like to draw your attention to the encouraging quote here from the FDA Director of Pulmonary Division, CDER. FSR plans to put out a white paper, host a webinar in the future, so stay tuned to other engagements, including a patient-focused drug development meeting at the FDA. Next slide, please. We are proud of the research that is coming out as a result of FSR-funded activity. Last year, there were a grand total of 26 publications released. This year, there are already 6 publications, in addition to the many abstracts being released at the American Thoracic Society. In addition, we closed our 4th fellowship grant this past April, and we are excited to announce new awardees by the end of May. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our 2021 FSR Pilot Grant awardee, Dr. Manish Bhargava, for participating in today's webinar. I will now pass it over to Tamara, FSR's Research Project Manager, to discuss more about FSR's grants that are currently accepting applications. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Mary. Next slide. So this year, FSR is excited to share with you our unique funding opportunity in the amount of $50,000 over 2 years, which is focused on cardiac sarcoidosis. This is the first time we are offering this grant. This grant focuses on bringing more attention to cardiac sarcoidosis research. With cardiac sarcoidosis having one of the worst prognoses of any manifestation of sarcoidosis, however, with only 5% of sarcoidosis patients being diagnosed, it is still considered a relatively rare manifestation in the United States. To entice more research into this rare but deadly form of sarcoidosis, FSR developed this 2-year grant. Next slide. In addition, FSR is excited to share with you our FSR Pilot Grant in the amount of $25,000. This grant was previously called the FSR Small Grant, so if you've seen that before, this grant aims to support smaller scale or pilot research projects which can be supported entirely through FSR funding or in partnership with additional funders. We have awarded over 8 different grants since 2018, and this will be our 7th cycle for the pilot grant. Next slide. In assessing applications, we look for strength in overall strategy, methodology analysis. Applications are encouraged from investigators across a variety of disciplines. Submitting projects will lead to a direct and significant impact upon sarcoidosis research. Next. So what should your proposals include? For both grants, proposals should include the literature review, data, and or previous research that is relevant to the proposal. In addition, PIs, co-Is, and sub-Is must all submit biosketches in the NIH format, as well as any letters of support for any collaborators on the proposal. It is very important that any collaborators provide their letters of support for the project, as this will give reviewers the confidence that the project is fully supported and that there will not be any delays. Next slide. The budget for the FSR pilot grant is limited to $25,000 and may not include any indirect costs. The budget for the FSR cardiac sarcoidosis grant is limited to $50,000 over 2 years, with $25,000 paid out per year. For both grants, budgets that include research lab equipment that utilizes over 50% of the proposed budget must also include a justification and a description of how that equipment will be used in the post-grant period. If your application is chosen, the awardee must submit proof of IRB approval or an IRB submission before FSR funding is released. Next slide. All awardees will submit biannual progress reports to FSR. These reports are due 6 months after the grant period start date, and every 6 months thereafter, the grant period is active for. Projects proposed may not be longer than 5 years in duration. Next slide. The deadline and timeline for both grants will be the same. All applications are due May 31st at 11:59 Central Time, and decision notifications will be sent early in July. FSR recommends the approximate start date of your project be at least 4 months ahead or after the application deadline to prevent any delays and allow time for contracting and fund delivery to your institution. Next slide. I am now honored to introduce Dr. Manish Bhargava, an associate professor of pulmonary, allergy, critical care, and sleep medicine at the University of Minnesota, to share some tips and tricks on how to write a successful grant for FSR's pilot grant and beyond. Dr. Bhargava has published over 40 articles in pulmonary and cardiac sarcoidosis, as well as articles on COVID-19. Dr. Bhargava is a recipient of the 2021 FSR pilot grant for his project entitled Comprehensive Assessment of Signal Transduction Pathways in Sarcoidosis. This research will address inflammation in sarcoidosis, commonly treated with steroids like prednisone, which can have severe side effects that may worsen the quality of life for patients. His study will provide the foundational work for a new group of medications called kinase inhibitors as a potential sarcoidosis treatment. And Dr. Bhargava, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me put my slides up. Can you see my slides?
Dr. Bhargava, we see it as partial screen, so we can see your notes and your slides at the same time. Now it's fine. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tamara, and everyone at FSR for inviting me to talk about how to approach this RFA. And I've not reviewed grants for FSR. So what I'll talk about is my opinion, which is one way to approach this funding mechanisms. But before I do that, I would like to highlight the importance of pilot grants or seed grants, which both of these mechanisms are. Small grants are essential to get projects off the ground. So pilot awards do that quite nicely. And most federal grants or larger foundation grants start with pilot funding or seed funding of some kind or the other. Besides the funds which come with it, it provides valuable opinion. People review the proposal and review the idea, and then you find out if your idea is meritorious or not. For us, we use several seed grants and pilot grants to develop essential feasibility data for our work, and also to optimize our methods, which we use for larger proposals. If the grant uses team science, especially across multiple sites, it establishes collaborative work, which is key review criteria for larger grants, especially with NIH. And even if your grant doesn't get funded, you get critical feedback, which we usually incorporate when we revise and resubmit the application at different places. For me, I was able to organize my abstract ideas, put them on paper, organize my thoughts, which helps in developing a later proposal. Like Sumara said, that our proposal, the pilot grant proposal, looks at signal transduction pathways in sarcoidosis. One of our collaborators developed this hierarchy of signal transduction pathways in prostate cancer, where a series of events happen where different proteins get phosphorylated and activated, and it results in abnormal functioning of the cells. Such signal transduction pathways in sarcoidosis are not known. So why do we care about something like this? Well, here, if CDK1 is responsible for aberrant signaling and responsible for disease development, you can do in silico work where you can identify different inhibitors of that particular molecule. And in this case, AG 024322 is an inhibitor of CDK1. You can then develop further experiments to test if treatment of in vitro or animal models or model systems can provide more proof of concept that these mechanisms can be targeted in human disease. And that is what we think our work has the potential to reveal in sarcoidosis. So why was my application, why was our application successful? It's hard for me to tell exactly why it was successful, but we believe that we proposed hypothesis-driven innovative work, and our work was in line with the mission of FSR, which is to enhance care and develop cure in sarcoidosis. We also think that our team was unique, and it had diverse skill set. It was composed of early stage investigators and established investigators, clinicians who had expertise in sarcoidosis, basic science investigators, and we proposed a fundamentally solid analysis plan, which probably helped. Our proposal proposed a small number of experiments. We were not clearly overambitious, but very importantly, we had next logical steps clearly outlined. And we think that we were responsive to the RFA, some of the details which Tamara indicated. And this is what the RFA instructions were. One of the key instructions was that the grant has to be very readable, and it provided the number of words and how the grant should be formatted. And readability of a grant is critical in how reviewers get engaged with it. And people have done research in what is readable. There are different terms which are phrased. Readability index is one of them. And the most difficult to read material needs people to have a college level degree. And I would argue that the grants should not be written with that readability score. The grants should be fairly easy to read. And this pertains to both the text of the the grant and also the figures used. Sometimes the figures used are small, blurry, which is counterproductive. Other times the legend which comes with the figure do not explain what the figure is about. So usually a figure and the legend which comes with it should be able to stand by itself. One thing which always is a bad idea is cut, copy, and paste from other proposals. So avoid doing that. And this is the rest of the RFA. I've highlighted some of the common themes, which are usually there in RFAs for the grants. And we approach this by grouping point 1 and 5 together, where the RFA requests for hypothesis and significance, and also the impact or the return on investment. And when you combine these two, we thought it looks very much like a specific Ames page for any other grant. The other pieces in the proposal were the relevant literature, the background, methods that we were proposing to use, and we clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of different individuals, co-investigators we had in the proposal. The key is to start early and also to recognize the constraints which are there at each institution. For us, the sponsored projects administration wants all the grants to be with them at least 3 business days before it is due to the foundation or the institution. And for budget, we need even more time. So the key is to start early. And if other co-investigators have to contribute to the writing of the proposal, you have to incorporate their timeline into what you are trying to accomplish. It's unfair to expect that they will drop the clinical work, the teaching, the research, which they have to do to work on your proposal. There are multiple ways to write a specific Ames page, and this is just one way to do it. And I will argue that the specific Ames page is the most important part of a grant in addition to the title. The specific Ames page should generate enough enthusiasm amongst the reviewers that during the review committee meeting, the reviewers are your supporters and they will argue for your proposal. And at the end of the specific Ames page, the hope is that the reviewers have already made up their mind about the merit of your proposal. They'll use the rest of the proposal to justify what they have decided. The first paragraph of the specific Ames page sets up the tone for the rest of the grant. And in fact, the first sentence is the most important one. As an example, if you're writing a grant on cardiac sarcoidosis, then it makes very little sense to talk about sarcoidosis as a multi-system disease of unknown etiology with granulomatous inflammation. You should try to tell people the importance of cardiac sarcoid as Tamara described in her description of the RFA. The first sentence is usually followed by 3 or 4 well-constructed sentences, which describe the knowns about the condition you're talking about. And it also provides the insights of what to expect in the rest of the proposal. It sets up the next sentence, which would be the key unknown, which the grant will talk about. And you can end that paragraph by having the impact of this work in some ways, where what will be enabled if this critical knowledge gap is closed. At the end of this paragraph, the reviewers should be able to clearly are convinced that it's an important problem and this problem is holding the field back. This leads to what, why, who paragraph, which essentially informs the reviewers that you and your team has the solution to the problem and that your team is the best equipped team that can create this solution. You should start this paragraph by long-term goals, which are broadly in the area or of the condition you are working on in this project. The objective of the current grant is more narrow and is closely aligned with the gap you have identified in the first paragraph. Then you identify then you describe the central hypothesis, which should be testable, and the rationale and the preliminary work which that central hypothesis is built on. This paragraph can end with 1 or 2 sentences describing the unique skills and other things which your team brings, which will help accomplish this, this work. The next paragraph is the Ames paragraph, which usually has a small number of conceptual aims, essentially meaning why you are planning to do what you're proposing, rather than just describing what you're doing. These aims are usually brief, headline type aims, and it describes the series of key activities which will help you accomplish the objective of the proposal. If there are more than one aims in the proposal, they should be interrelated, but they should be independent of each other. For larger proposals, people also use hypotheses for each aim or sub-aim, and that is something which you can consider for smaller grants also. And the last paragraph is the so-called payoff paragraph or return to investment paragraph, which this RFA says that how you will get bigger grants or more funding to finish this work. And the best payoff, in fact, is the one which will show that the hypothesis that you are testing is actually correct, and that will move the field. But even if the hypothesis is not correct, the field moves and there's forward progress. So the last paragraph should have your thoughts about how the field moves, no matter whether the hypothesis is correct or not. So because you started your pilot grant really early, which is way beyond today, you spend 2 or 3 weeks to develop this well-crafted, carefully thought out, near perfect specific aims page. And then now you have to get an idea of what other people think about this near perfect specific aims page that you have developed. For this, you'll have to make yourselves vulnerable. You have to be open to criticism. And you should find people who will be able to honestly and brutally tell you the truth about what they think about the specific aims page. So you should ask for feedback. People who will tell you that this is the perfect specific aims page ever probably are not the right people to get this feedback from. And once you get the feedback, it might be too harsh. Even if it is, that's okay. That is actually even better. It'll make your grant better, provided you respond to the feedback. And if you have enough time, and if you have friends who are willing to provide you more feedback, or colleagues who are willing to provide you more feedback, do this process again. It should be an iterative process. While you're doing all of this, you have to make sure that readability is still the bottom line. Some grants are comprehensive, filled with text and jargon all over the place. I would say that you have to balance out comprehensiveness with comprehensibility of the grant, because reviewers can get lost in all the technical aspects, which is possibly the worst thing which can happen with your specific aims page. Once the specific aims page is ready, the rest of the grant should not take a whole lot of time to develop. Background is important because you convey the relationship of the work which has already been done to what you're proposing to do. In some ways, establish the platform for the work that you're proposing. what was called a scientific premise in the past, and NIH is moving away from that work. This section helps you bring all the reviewers to the same page. And sometimes there may be a little education of the reviewers which could be involved while you're doing this. Instead of having a litany of references, it has to be very focused in the area of work that you're proposing. And given in this RFA that there are only 1,800 words, the background section has to be carefully developed with each sentence conveying a specific message. And I just want to say one thing here, that NIH is moving away from what it used to call scientific premise to what they're now calling weakness and rigor of prior work. And I'm not sure whether FSR reviewers will use the same principles, but this is identifying what the strengths and the weaknesses of your own and others who have worked in this area were. Once the reviewers kind of know where the current edge of knowledge is in your area of work, then you can start describing your methods. Preliminary work is absolutely critical because it tells the reviewers the quality of work you have done, and how you have approached research in the past is a strong predictor of what you will do in the future. It also establishes feasibility of the work you're proposing, specifically if you're using cutting edge technologies. The design has to be robust and the analysis plan has to be solid. Some of the common mistakes, common errors which happen is the controls are not frequently described appropriately, or the power of the study is not addressed. Or if you're doing multiple tests, you don't consider multiple hypothesis testing. One thing about small grants is that you have to be extremely focused. You cannot be overambitious. And all grants, you have to describe the expected outcomes, what the potential pitfalls are, and how you will deal with those pitfalls. And then the last section in our FSR proposal was to justify the personnel who we included in the study. Sometimes people will include the so-called heavy hitters in the field on the proposal, which is fine if they have a defined role in the proposal. Just to have them on the grant would not help you if there is no specific role. And then with limited role, you have to be careful in how you use the money, and it should be well defined somewhere in the proposal. And title is extremely important. This is a review of a book on a popular website where large majority of people who bought the book reviewed it at 4 or a 5. And the name of the book is Everything Men Know About Women, in consultation with Cindy Cashman, etc. And it's 25th anniversary year of this book. The beauty of the book is that it is 100 blank pages and it has no text in it. The bottom line is the title is important, and with the title and the specific Ames page, the SROs will use this information for deciding where the grant will go, and your grant reviewers will be decided by this. Also, one final point: not too many incomplete pieces of work get famous. This is one of the top 10 incomplete famous paintings, but please submit the final version of your proposal. I've been guilty of submitting an unfinished grant and it did not go very far. With that, I'll take questions and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Bargava, for all that useful and thoughtful information. So we will now begin our question and answer session. As a reminder, to ask a question, please type it into the chat box located on the bottom of your screen. So the first question that we have for is actually to FSR. This is a very common question that we get, and it is, what is included in an allowable cost? So to be clear, for an allowable cost, we do not allow any indirect costs. Each applicant should also include a narrative in the budget justification section explaining each of their budget expenses. Allowable costs include dedicated salary and fringe benefits for key personnel in the study. That includes any technicians that might need to be hired or any coordinator time that needs to be secured. In addition, like I mentioned before, research equipment, if that research equipment's life is beyond the time of your grant, including in the justification a description of how that equipment will be used in the post-grant period as well. And any trial costs, whether it be lab costs, dedicated time, a lot of those materials are allowable costs just to be included into the narrative as well. If you do have any co-funding or any other grants that are already funding your proposal, please provide those sources as well as the amounts and what they're covering. And so that way we have clear indications of what funding will be coming from FSR and what that'll be used towards. We do every 6 months, like I said, we do biannual reporting, but we also will require financial reporting as well. And then any leftover funds can be sent back to FSR. And if you do need more time to extend your grant period, that is something you can contact the FSR research team to get approvals for. That's just for that. So the next question is also about funding and is directed towards Dr. Bargava. So you did talk about the limited funding that the FSR Pilot Grant does provide. How do you recommend people best utilize funding given, the $25,000 grant, but what's the best ways to make sure they get the most value out of the money for the grant?
Yeah, it could be challenging. So you'll have to use the money judiciously. That is number one. The approach we took was that we did not use the money to recruit additional subjects for our studies, but we used these funds to work on already collected biospecimens, which we leveraged other proposals, other funding grants, which we had from. The other thing is that, you'll not be able to do a lot of work with small pilot grants. So you have to be very focused and prioritize when you're writing the proposal, what you want to do. You can leverage the data which you generate with the small amount of money to apply for other grants. But focus is the key to use small amounts of money that you get.
Thank you. So the next question that we have is, what role did or will, if you're still looking for funding for your proposal, will the FSR Pilot Grant help you in obtaining additional larger grant funding? And why is a grant of this size, specifically the smaller pilot grants, important?
It's critical, and we were in this situation a few years back where we got a small seed grant from our institution. We developed methods using that small grant, and we were able to use those methods for an NIH application, which got funded. And I think that we will use this FSR small grant in the same way, where this kinase inhibition strategy is a completely new area of investigation for us. We are developing new methods to study all possible kinases. And we are comparing healthy controls with subjects with sarcoidosis. So we think that we will develop proof of concept, we will develop methods which will leverage on larger groups of patients, when we use this data for larger grants to NIH or other agencies.
Thank you. So the next question that we have, you talked about a lot of the important aspects in writing an effective grant proposal, but in your opinion, what do you think is the #1 most important aspect of writing an effective grant proposal that can be utilized across the different types of grants, not just FSR, but including the NIH and beyond?
So the two really important things, the content which goes in the grant is important. And because these grants at the end of the day are doing you're proposing scientific research, so you're doing technical work in the grant. So the content has to be fundamentally strong. But then readability, and people should be able to understand what you're proposing. So that is equally important. There has to be a fine balance where you cannot jam all technical aspects in a grant in, but it should not be so simple that people don't think that you're doing innovative work. It has to be a fine balance.
So the next question is, when you're writing a grant and, with such a multidisciplinary disease such as sarcoidosis, how do you make sure that that readability that you just spoke about comes through across to the multidiscipline, review panel that there might be, or especially in the NIH when there might not be sarcoidosis specialists on that review panel?
Yeah, I think a lot of institutions are spending a fair amount of effort to make sure that grants can be understood by a diverse group of people. For example, our institution will allow us to get external reviews on a proposal. And it is both about content of the grant and also the readability of the grant. And I think it is important, if your institution doesn't have this capability, you should get feedback from your colleagues, both about the content and about how easy or difficult it is to read a proposal. I have teenage children who I bribe frequently and ask them to read my specific Ames page.
Oh, that's fantastic. Very unique approach. So another question that we get very frequently to FSR specifically is about who is eligible to apply for the grant. Specifically, are non-US citizens and non-US institutions eligible? The answer is yes. So any non-US citizen or non-US institution are eligible to apply for these two grants. The funding will be sent to your institution directly, and the annual reports will be the same. But we just wanted to be clear that you do not have to be a US citizen or be a US institution to be eligible for funding. So then our next question will be, what is the success rate that you've seen in terms of converting a pilot grant into a larger functioning grant?
It's challenging, clearly, with funding as tight as it is. Getting federal funding is difficult, but without pilot grants, it would be impossible to get any money anywhere unless you have philanthropic support. So I think pilot grants are extremely important to develop proposals which go for larger organizations for funding.
How many pilot grants have you successfully converted to larger grants?
So I used two different pilot mechanisms and combined them to get NIH grant. And I'm hoping that this FSR pilot grant, which I have by itself, would be enough for me to obtain funding for this line of work.
Okay. And what has been your experience with the FSR in terms of writing the pilot grant and the reporting process that you had? I don't believe you've reported yet, but what has your process been, and how do you find how do you find these smaller grants to apply for?
I thought that the RFA had very, very clear instructions on how you should format your grant, what the content would be. So the RFA was really, really helpful. And if you follow the instructions in the RFA, it will go long ways. And then it depends on the idea, which you can control, the reviewers, if they like your idea or not. But you have to clearly outline how you will use these funds, what the logical next steps are. And if you do that, it'll improve your chances.
Great. And, as I mentioned before, another common question we get is, what is the reporting process like? So every 6 months, FSR does send a report with an update, with a section for an update, like I said, the financial reporting as well. But we also encourage our app awardees to also provide lay summaries and updates to our community as well. So we like to engage our researchers with our community to talk to patients as well, and to really, showcase their research. So we do present it in multiple newsletters. We do put out, multiple releases, and like to share the message of the great work that our researchers are doing. So with that, I do want to thank you again, Dr. Bhargava, for your great presentation today, and for all the information and all of the attendees that are joined today's webinar. If you are interested in learning more about FSR programming like this, and wish to receive research updates and information on funding opportunities, you can visit our physician community page, which we will be putting on the link soon. You can see it on the screen. In addition, it's going to be in the chat. And in addition to that, we also have a page dedicated to look at our FSR grants. You can see more about the pilot research grant, as well as the cardiac sarcoidosis grant, and our FSR grant page. And you will see updates about our fellowship grant that we'll be announcing soon. And to see publications that have come out of FSR funded research, we do recommend looking at our FSR research library, where we update and showcase all of the research that is coming out of the FSR research community. Next slide. So if you have any more questions or would like to learn more about any of our grants, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You'll see my email on the screen, and you can find out more on our website as well. And thank you again all today. As a reminder, our pilot grant and FSR cardiac sarcoidosis grant do close May 31st at 11:59 Central Time. So not Eastern Time, but Central Time. We have gotten people who have, seen the timing be different, but it will be 11:59 Central Time. And so to learn more, again, please visit, and to apply as well, please see the links in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you again, Dr. Bhargava. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.